Hey everyone, welcome to another Friday live stream. My name is Will Hookinga from AmericanRumReport.com, and this week I'm really excited to be joined by Andrew Lohfeld of Roulaison Distilling Company in New Orleans, Louisiana. Andrew, how are you? Say hi to everyone. We've got people coming in from all over the place: Orlando, Toronto, Oakland, Manchester. How's it going today?
This is awesome. It's going great. I'm doing pretty well considering.
Yeah, I know you guys are staying busy doing. We were just talking before we went live about, you had to kind of get back into a rum frame of mind for this conversation because you've been so busy with hand sanitizer, right?
Yeah, it's been little over 2 months now, and we haven't done like an actual rum fermentation or distillation. So it's definitely feeling a little rusty right now.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this will get you back into the spirit a little bit. But real quick before we get started, everyone, I kind of wanted to go over the agenda with you today. So, first of all, on your right, you've probably noticed the chat over there. Like Troy, for example, who says he loves Relaison's rum. Awesome. So just feel free to let us know where you're tuning in from. Any random comments you have throughout the presentation, put them in there. We're also going to try to save some time for Q&A at the end. So we're going to spend about 30 to 40 minutes on the main topic of the presentation, and then save some time at the end for questions. So if you have a question for Andrew at any point throughout the presentation, there's a ask a question box in the middle of your screen down there. So if you click there and put your question there rather than in the chat, that'll be the best way to make sure we see it and get to it there at the end. So also, we would love for you to share this event with your friends. So there's a button at the top right. You can share on Facebook, Twitter, basically anywhere that you can post a link. So feel free to invite others to join us. But yeah, let's get started. So first, I want to talk about you for a second, Andrew. So you are, as I mentioned earlier, co-founder, head distiller at Roulaison. But you're also vice president of the Louisiana Distillers Guild, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to have you on, because not only I'm really looking forward to talking about what y'all are doing at Roulaison, because as I've said before, I think you guys have some of the most distinctive rum being made in the U.S. right now. It really stands out. But I also think that you have kind of a unique perspective into the broader rum scene across all of Louisiana, which, as we'll get to, is a really interesting part of the country rum wise right now. There's a lot of stuff going on down there. Obviously, the sugar industry is big down there, which is part of it. But to kind of kick things off, for those who are less familiar with Roulaison, can you bring them up to speed on who y'all are, how long you've been making rum, and kind of what your style of rum is like?
Totally, yeah. So Roulaison's been around for a little over 3 years now in terms of production. We opened up, I want to say about November 2016, but it's been in the works for probably 4 years before that. So it's a lot of planning, a lot of preparation, and a lot of time going through permitting. But originally, so I'm originally from Philly, grew up there, went to school there, and then post school really wanted to get into the distilling world. And at the time, there just weren't a ton of distilleries in the area. So popped up to New York, worked at Kings County Distillery for a while there. I don't know if anybody knows Kings County, super cool
Yeah.
whiskeys that they've got there. And spent a few years there, and through that whole time knew I wanted to open up a distillery of my own. And still, the plan evolved over time. So went from whiskey to rum, just, really fell in love with the spirit. And I mean, as I'm sure a ton of people are aware, it's definitely been evolving over the last couple of years. When we were looking at it, there just weren't a ton of like super, super interesting rums being made in the States. And, we wanted to kind of help that, move that along a little bit.
Yeah.
So I joined up with my business partner, Patrick, who's a buddy of mine from, yes, that's Hoagies. My eye was just right to the Hoagies. I need one of those.
That's how you know you're from Philly.
Yeah. And a buddy of mine from school, and we moved down here. Patrick's originally from Louisiana, so that's a part of why we came down here. But the big interest for me was that sugarcane industry. You know, being down in Louisiana, we can get stuff that we can't get anywhere else in the country. So we're working directly with mills rather than wholesalers, brokers, and you know, when we're lucky enough, we get to work with the farmers directly and, you know, be able to source sugarcane, better grades of molasses than you typically can. And I was mentioning to Will earlier, we're not a big, I mean, he knows we're not a big operation at all. You know, we're in this tiny 2,200 square foot space, working on very small scale stills. And one of the big benefits with us with being so close is we can go direct to the mills, and they're thankfully like really willing to work with. Yeah, that's pretty much half of our entire space right there on the screen right now.
Yeah.
And so yeah, not anything fancy by any means, but with us being so close, we can go directly to those mills, and those guys are super nice there. And you know, they've told us we could go there with 5-gallon buckets if we wanted to and just fill up from the tap. Whereas, you know, Louisiana is not the only sugarcane industry, sugarcane growing state in the country. We've got Florida too, and when we had a couple interactions with a few of the mills there, they were pretty much, if you're not ordering by the tanker or the barge, they didn't really want to talk to you. And that's, of course, you know, that was 6 or 7 years ago now, so it's definitely evolved since then. But we're very grateful to be here working with those guys, and you know, being in New Orleans is a really awesome place to be.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned we have some pictures kind of to show people around. First of all, just to go back, these are the main rums that you guys are making right now, and to make sure people got a shot of that. The stills that you referenced. So are these all the stills that you guys have set up right now?
Yeah, that's all we've got. 5 little 25-gallon pot stills. And that's what we do 100% of our product on. You know, we're very, like, one of the big things we're on is transparency. We're very open about what we do and how adamant we are about trying to do everything that we can ourselves. So all the product that we make, all the rum that we make is produced on those stills. You know, we ferment it, we distill it. We're really big on no additives with our rums. So we'll do, you know, we're talking just molasses, water, and yeast for our fermentations, and yeah, our little baby pot stills, and then really big on no additives post production. So you know, really no filtering at all. We'll pass it through like a tiny, like, you know, plate or like cotton filter, really, to get any like particles out of it. But other than that, nothing done to it, no chill carbon filtration or any of that, nothing added. We just really wanted to show off like what Louisiana rum can be, for sure, too.
Definitely. And I know we're going to talk more, because I know you guys have a pretty unique kind of approach to fermentation and how you're doing things there. I wanted to go back. You know, you mentioned the molasses that you're able to have access to. What differentiates, you know, the molasses that you're able to get locally versus other molasses that you know is out there in the world?
So one of the big differences when you're talking, you know, rums produced here specifically, you know, we're getting actual local molasses, where, you know, like 100% of our molasses is coming from, it's 60 miles away is where they're producing it, and they're sourcing their sugarcane from about that distance away too, from the surrounding 5 parishes of the mill. So super local when you're talking about that. And, you know, a part of that's important because it's, you know, a little bit, you know, you can get really esoteric, you know, talking about terroir and spirits or whatever, if you want to go into that. But, you know, it's that closeness that we really appreciate, where, you know, someone like a larger distillery can't really do that as much as they can, because their production outpaces, you know, the productions for other areas. So if you look across the Caribbean, a lot of places are supplementing or sourcing completely from, you know, molasses coming from other countries. Even,
Right.
Louisiana is a big supplier to a certain extent too. Florida, Brazil,
Mm-hmm.
all over. And then the other interesting thing, and I kind of mentioned that to you a little bit too, is Louisiana isn't great at growing sugarcane. It's not an ideal location. It wants to be in a warmer place. It wants to grow for longer. Our seasons are much shorter than you'll typically see. We're only going, maybe 10 months for a growing season
Okay.
on sugarcane here, or 14 months, if you can. And we've got those much bigger shifts in terms of temperature across the year.
Right.
So it definitely still gets cold here, and there's always that big worry if there's going to be a big cold front that comes through during harvest season, because if you get like a cold snap and it goes to freezing the sugar cane, it's interesting too, because anytime they say that there's something bad for the sugar cane, I'm like, yes, that's like a good thing, because whatever is bad for making sugar is really good for making
Good for making rum.
like the
right.
more stress, yeah, the less ideal of a situation that the sugar is in, the more kind of acceptable, better byproducts you're going to get out for a rum fermentation, because they're taking what they all the good stuff, the sugar out, the sucrose,
Right.
but if there's more glucose, fructose, whatever, all those added minerals, nutrients, and all that in there, if there's more of those, that's better for a rum fermentation.
For sure. Yeah. And so we got some pictures right here. I know this is the truck you guys get your molasses out of, and then the big, tanks in the distillery. We have an image. When I saw this, I thought this was a fermentation, and you were like, no, that's just the molasses right there. So that was interesting.
Yeah. So it's the molasses itself will, I mean, people are probably aware of that, like, great molasses flood of 1919, right? Where molasses expands and contracts based on temperature, just like a normal liquid would, and they'll foam up based on whatever constituents are in the molasses too. Sometimes it'll be higher protein content or gluten or whatever you'll have that makes it a little bit thicker, more viscous. It'll foam up, and that's the other really interesting thing for being local and sourcing the way that we do. It's frustrating to a certain extent, but there's always like I want to say like a cyclicality of our molasses. The molasses changes based on the time of the year that we're getting it, and also you imagine like these massive tanks that they're stored in. It'll kind of separate based on what part of the tank they're pulling from, or what part of the year as the molasses drains down, what section of that molasses is coming out. And it's noticeable to us here. There's like subtle differences in products, say from molasses pulled in the summer versus pulled right after harvest season. But it's all about kind of embracing those differences, and there's adjustments that we have to make pretty much every time we get a new batch of molasses in, which is frustrating and fun.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting, because I think, as a rum consumer, one thing I feel like I hear a lot is that, like, the type of molasses has like not as much of an influence on the final flavor profile as the rum, as an ingredient like cane juice or something like that. But I feel like the more I talk to distillers, the more it seems like they're pretty particular about the molasses that they want to use.
Yeah, and it's definitely, it's a part of like how you treat it as well. If you throw it in if you ferment it really highly, you throw it in a multi-column, you're not going to get a ton of molasses influence out of the rum no matter what. But especially when you're talking like lower proof pot-distilled distillations, a lot of that is going to come over. So you've got to be particular about it, because you're going to taste it.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about kind of the broader scene across Louisiana right now. From your perspective, as you know, being in a leadership role of the Louisiana Distillers Guild, what is the rum landscape like in Louisiana right now relative to when y'all first got started?
It's definitely grown a ton. And especially looking back at like when we were first thinking about started, so like we were in production 3 years ago, but thinking about it 7, 8 years ago, looking back at like how it was in 2012, 2013, totally different.
Right.
Now we have I want to say about 30, 35 distilleries across the state, and something, like we were talking like more of the ones in the guild, I think it's like 95% at least produce a rum. And
Right.
across the state as a whole, we're looking at like 75, 80% of the distilleries are making rum or making a rum.
Which I feel like I definitely don't see that in other states most of the time. And, obviously the presence of sugarcane in Louisiana, I'm guessing, has an influence on that. But like, is there also just, is there more of a rum quote unquote culture in Louisiana relative to other places in the country? Do you feel like at all?
I think the big influence is the sugarcane industry, because it completely, it can completely encompass, your life when you're down here. And we're kind of skewed too, because if you look at all the distilleries across the state, they're not really across the state, but really only in, I think it's all but 2 or 3 of the distilleries we have here are in the bottom third of the state. And the bottom third is that sugarcane growing area.
Gotcha.
Actually, I've got a really bad map, which I didn't send you because it's old, but I don't even know if you can
Oh,
see
pull
it.
it up.
So here we go.
Okay.
And this is outdated, and I also made a lot of scribbles on here. But so we've got
That's
like the
okay.
entirety of Louisiana here, and if you just look at it, like we're pretty much like you draw a line here, and like here down is where the distilleries are, and that's pretty much where you'll see sugarcane growing too. It's only really here. Once we
Okay.
get into like freezing temperatures up north, it's a lot harder to grow. But that's changing too. This map is like 2 years, year and a half old. I just had it
Gotcha.
around. So we have a few more distilleries popping up in the top of the state, and they're focusing on grain-based spirits, so going for more whiskeys, because
Okay.
that's, you'll start to see that up there.
What are, as you kind of look across all those distilleries right now, what are some of the most interesting things happening in rum to you?
So kind of going back to that changes between when we were starting to now.
Yeah.
When we started up, there was only five distilleries producing a rum. 4 were like actual rum distilleries, and only 1 was like in within 60 miles or so of New Orleans. So that's part of the reason as well. But the big difference is, we've seen that pretty much across the board for the rum industry. It wasn't for the general consumer. It wasn't like a serious spirit. Most places, if they're making rum, they'll stick to we've got our silver, we've got our spiced rum, and we've got our gold. And getting into the whole silver and gold talk is
we could talk about that for a while, right?
Yeah. So put a pin in that. But that was pretty much as far as distilleries went in terms of, at least in the States, for most of them, for their products. And now, a part of it is we've got distilleries that have been here longer, so they've got more like older stocks of barrels that are coming due. So you'll see, smaller releases of older spirit and just more interesting takes, barrel finishes. I know, so like Bayou is a good example of one of the first, or one of the few older distilleries where they started out just spiced and silver and I think maybe a gold, but now they've got an XO. They're doing single barrel releases where you're doing barrel picks. And I mean, old New Orleans too is, Celebration Distillation is a great example of that too, because they've been around forever, and they still, they made some changes over the years, but they mostly stuck to their crystal, their white rum, They're amber and they're spiced. You know, they added a gingeroo, the ginger drink. But now they added on a 10-year. They have a 20th anniversary. They're working on a 25th anniversary. They had this really cool release for the tricentennial of New Orleans, which was, I want to say, I forget what the barrel finish was on there. I want to say like cognac barrels or Madeira casks, some really cool stuff in terms of barrel finishing. And I think it's just treated with a lot more respect now. You know, it can be a serious spirit, and you know that's what we intended to from the beginning for us. And it's, you know, we're excited that we've got more folks in that realm.